All right, guys, so this is going to be my AFC team's most important players. We'll just start off with the Chiefs this year. I believe it's going to be the receiving core. Now, obviously, they were a good team last year, and Mahomes is the most important player, but we know that's going to be more important that the wide receiver core steps up and plays well. Obviously, Mahomes doesn't need the receiver core as we saw last year, but if they do step up, they'll end up making the Chiefs an even better team. Next up is the Raiders, and it's going to be Gardner Minshew. Minshew is going to need to be part of the heart of this team's offense. The offensive line is all right. The receiver core is solid too, but the Raiders need a true heart on this offense. Is Minshew going to be that? Probably not, but he has to be. Otherwise, I think the Raiders will fail. I think if he can manage to be the heart of the offense, though, the Raiders can make a wild card push. But quite frankly, I don't see that happening, especially after the recent week one loss to the Chargers. Chargers up next. I have J.K. Dobbins or the run game. Gus Edwards might start as the lead back, but I think by some time Dobbins can take the starting job. And as we saw in week one, which I did write this before week one, I think there's some intrigue to what Dobbins may bring, and he was obviously very good. And he's been injured like his entire career, so it was very fun to see him have this game. He was a higher pick when drafted because he was great at OSU, but he hasn't been on the field to show it in the NFL. The Chargers are going to need a strong O-line and running back play under Harbaugh, and Dobbins may bring a little more flash than Gus does. And I'm very happy for him in his week one win against the Raiders, because obviously he had a great game, 135 yards and a touchdown. It might have been two, but I think it was one. For the Broncos, I think it's clearly Bo Nix, and the Broncos have a solid O-line and a fine wide receiver core. I think it's important that Bo Nix is good, though. It's not just important for the team's success, but also the team's future. I genuinely believe the Broncos are being slept on because of Nix. I thought he was one of the best quarterbacks in the draft, as I said in my video, putting him number 3. And I probably would have slid him at 2, but I didn't want to make it too outrageous. But anyway, I think it's clear the Broncos need him to succeed because of many reasons. And those are, obviously, you kind of gassed him up and you took him pick 12, way higher than people thought. And the Broncos just haven't had a good quarterback in a while. Now, he didn't look great against the Seahawks, but I think it's just ridiculous the amount of hate he's already getting for one bad game, especially when it's his first game in the league and against a team that everyone wants to say has the best defense. But we'll move on. Up next is the Steelers, and I think it really needs to just be everyone that steps up. Obviously, I think quarterbacks is number one, but super bad teams need everyone to be good and step up. And the Steelers aren't a super bad team, but the defense is really just super valuable to them. Justin Fields and Russ didn't either have the best preseason. Now, in the week one game the Steelers had, Fields was a fine quarterback, but everything was outside of the hashes. So there might be a small fear there from either the OC or Fields to actually attack the middle of the field. But, you know, you're looking at it, they really need quarterbacks to step up. But I think saying that everyone needs to step up is also important, because this team feels like they should be going for the Super Bowl because they made the playoffs so many years in a row, but they're really not. And we'll just have to see how the season goes. But I'd say it's really quarterbacks, but just everyone that needs to step up because of a lack of how good their quarterbacks are. Unless Justin Fields finally breaks through, and I think he'll be fine, but I don't know if he's going to truly break through. For the Baltimore Ravens, I'm going to say receiver group. It's been offense so far, but I promise I'll try to change it up eventually. But the Ravens receiver core was actually solid last year, and we saw Lamar win a kind of controversial MVP, but an MVP nonetheless. I think this year the receiver core is a little more questionable. Obviously, OBJ was solid, but just a bridge guy. Someone like Tez Walker would be cool to see become one of the main guys in Baltimore. Obviously, I believe they still have Rashad Bateman and Zay Flowers, but they're going to need to truly step up and show that someone's a number one and someone's a true number 2 receiver in the league. For the Bengals, I think it's going to be O-line. Really, though, just keep Burrow healthy. I get questioning him because of injuries and stuff, but this is an elite QB in my opinion. Obviously, he just crapped the bed against the Patriots, which I'm really mad about. But he's supposedly healthy this year, so we'll have to see how he performs. But really, the O-line needs to keep him safe. Then I think they might be contenders. Now, Joe Burrow seems to always suck in week one. So we're just going to have to hope that he can bounce back from this and get back to being the Joe Burrow that a lot of us love. Up next for the Browns, it's probably going to have to be Deshaun Watson. And I think the Browns defense is still great, but the Browns just need their quarterback that's being paid like the best quarterback to perform. They need him to avoid injury and to actually play at a high level when on the field. Obviously, you might say that they can't need QB that bad, but it's not like Joe Flacco took them on a deep playoff runs. This team's honestly good enough to be a wild card with a mediocre quarterback. But with a good quarterback, I think they can honestly be a Super Bowl team. But it is the Browns, so we all know how that usually ends up. And obviously, Deshaun Watson just completely crapped the bed against the Cowboys, which was really disappointing. But we'll have to see if he can bounce back in any sort of way. The Texans, I'm going to have to say consistency. The Texans roster does look pretty good, but they need to keep up and improve from last year. I have a feeling they might end up very inconsistent this year, but I do think they should be a good team. But that's only if they're consistent and if they can keep up and continue off of last year. And this also does include Stroud potentially taking another step forward, even though it might be a little hard just because of how good he was last year. They did look good in their Week 1 game against the Colts, but we're going to have to see if they can keep it up. For the Titans, I think it is Will Levis. I made a video on why the Titans are a sleeper team. I actually believe Will Levis will be a good quarterback in this league, maybe just around top 16, top 20. I think the Titans season does lay on him mostly. The Titans team is actually pretty solid all around, but if Levis can be good, then they definitely have a shot at being a wild card team. This will be hard because of a good division, including the Texans, Jag, and Colts, who we're all talking about around here. But I believe they can be a team that later in the year takes a team out of the playoffs, like a late season knockout, late season upset. And I believe in Levis, and hopefully the Titans do too. The Jaguars is probably Trayvon Walker, and I feel like the Jags are being slept on, though. The O-line looks good, receivers are good, running back room, linebackers, secondary, D-line. Now, I think it's important that Trayvon Walker really steps up this season. He's been good enough so far that I think he'll be fine. I think Lawrence is the most important piece right now as well. Without him healthy last season, the Jaguars struggled a lot. I think this season is clearly on Lawrence, but I think the Jags and the fans kind of want to see Trayvon Walker take another step. He's been good in his career, but not better than Hutchinson. I think they'd like to see him at least try to compete for that spot or even be considered as a defensive player of the year. I actually think a lot of people forget about Trayvon Walker, and I feel like he could kind of end up like Jadeveon Clowney, but I think this year is kind of make or break for him just to end up and show that he might actually be an elite linebacker. For the Colts, I think it is Anthony Richardson. It feels like this is a win now roster, but kind of just a wild card roster. But I think it's going to fall on quarterback play. They had Minshew play solid for them last season and almost bring them to the playoffs, but we'll need to see Anthony Richardson can perform as good as where he was picked suggest. This is still kind of a rookie year for him though, but he is in a pretty competitive division, so we'll have to see how it ends up. Obviously, the Colts played pretty tight with the Texans last week in Week 1. And we'll just have to see if the Colts can keep it up and keep improving on top of that pretty solid performance from them. For the AFC East, we'll go and start it off. And the Patriots, I originally said Drake May, but honestly, it might be the defense. This offense obviously only put up 17 points, and it's the Bengals in Week 1, so we know how they've fared out the past couple years. But I'll keep this short for Drake May. The Pats aren't truly contenders, but I think the most important thing for them this year is that Drake May looks good when he does play. Now, that's pretty much what I originally wrote, but I think that the defense might actually end up being their best asset here just because of how, Jacoby Brissett didn't have a great game. He looked fine. He looked kind of the definition of mid, but obviously they're going to want Drake May to come in and play pretty good, but if they want to win games, then it's going to rely all on the defense. For the Jets, I think it's got to be Aaron Rodgers. Honestly, I'll keep this semi-short too, though, but Rodgers needs to be good. He won't be an MVP, but this team should be ready to win. If he's not great, this team will probably finish 9-8. We know that this defense is actually pretty great. The receiver room is full of studs and superstar in Garrett Wilson. All it feels like they truly need is a quarterback. Now, Rodgers actually did look fine in his first week, but I don't really think that there was a lot more to desire, and I don't really know how much more he's going to go up this year. Obviously, it was his first game in like 600 or so days, at least his first full game. But we'll just have to see how it ends up for him and the Jets this year. For the Bills, Josh Allen is good, the O-line is decent, and the defense is solid. But I think this wide receiver room can really exceed expectations. This team will end up top 10 in the league. A lot of people aren't expecting a big year out of the Bills, but I believe they did a good job with what they had to work with this year. I think they really set themselves up for the future too. But this year, the receiving core needs to show. And not only is it the future they set themselves up for, I think it's kind of also the present. I think that they can actually have a pretty solid year this year. Our last team, but definitely not least because they'll be a playoff team, I have the Dolphins. And I said the trenches for this one. The Dolphins have superstars at most positions, but they need the trenches to be strong this year. More specifically, the interior of the O-line and the D-line as a whole. They lost Robert Hunt, Connor Williams, and Lester Cotton. Isaiah Wynn is a solid guard, but will start the year on PUP. And Liam Eichenberg was the second-round pick 3 years ago, so he could end up a solid guard. This will be Brewer's 5th year, and we'll see what he brings, though. The Dolphins' defensive line looks like they'll be fine, but they are missing a few pieces from last year. Zach Sealer will be returning coming off of 10 sacks, but they lost both Christian Wilkins and Raekwon Davis. I believe that Deshaun Hand and Calais Campbell can be solid replacements, though. Campbell is getting pretty old, and Deshaun Hand, though, he's always been solid. Jalen Phillips isn't exactly a down defensive lineman for them, but I really like his story, and he's actually showed why he was a first-round pick in the league. So he'll definitely be able to help and support this team this season, coming off of the edge for the Dolphins. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I also have a video on NFC teams that I made probably a week or two ago. So I hope you guys come back for more and have a good day.